Hello, YouTubers. Joe here. Now, I've got a story to tell you today. Actually, it's a mini story and then a little bit of a longer story. The Wall Street Journal today had an article on when mid-level health jobs shrink, and their point was that a lot of people who, you know, would become LPNs, licensed practical nurses, or I think other states have other names for them. Ohio called them licensed practical nurses, LPNs. Would become an LPN, and then sometimes they would go on to become registered nurses, either by doing a hospital training course or uh, a college-oriented nursing program course that often led to a 4-year baccalaureate nursing degree. And their point was that these mid-level jobs are disappearing, and so you're left with the registered nurses, and they all now have college degrees, or expected to have at some point. And then you have the sort of the grunt works, uh, they call them aides, but they're they're just doing grunt work, and they don't really do patient care in the sense of doing things like, they don't do a lot of things like changing dressings and stuff, which the LPNs used to do. Heck, for that matter, the medical students and residents used to do it when we were in training. So I wrote this little comment in the Wall Street Journal commentariat, and it said, in the genre of when I was a boy, herewith. And I said, when I was a medical student and resident, and that was between 1972 and 1978, nurses could generally be seen actually going in and out of patient rooms. And they'd lay their eyes and hands on the patients. I mean, you'd actually be interacting, taking care of the patients. And these were both of the RN and LPN variety. And I would have happily been taken care of by either one of these classes of nurses. As I was when I was hospitalized for 2 weeks with a ruptured appendix and then had a subsequent pelvic abscess. Now, in 1991, when I pulled the plug and retired, LPNs had largely disappeared. And one would have thought the RNs had too, but no, they were generally holed up in the report / shift / report / shift change / don't bother us area, doing their cardexes and paperwork. And I'll tell you, it required an act of God to get them out of there at shift change, and woe betide you if you tried to. Boy, there'd be grief to pay for that. Occasionally, some sort of aide would come and perhaps look at the equipment attached to a patient, particularly if it had been beeping and shrieking for some time. Beep, beep, beep. Sometimes they'd come in the room, but more often they'd just sort of stand in the doorway, and almost give you like a papal wave while they made a notation on a form. And the situation that I just described there had pretty much not improved by 2000, when I was at my mother's side for the last 48 hours of her life in a fairly well-respected Southwest Ohio hospital. And the fact that her son and daughter were both physicians, well, my sister's an osteopathic physician. I'm an allopathic physician. And stayed with her, might actually have improved the situation to be somewhat better than, maybe the actual situation is worse than I described, because it seemed to be the situation was pretty much identical as I described in 1991. Now, having said that, that's background for the following tale. And And this took place in fall of 1995 when I was a first-year surgery resident. I subsequently, after I did my first year of surgery, I went on and did anesthesia because I've just got two motor neurons in my hand. Just squeeze the bag, squeeze the bag, squeeze the bag. So anyway, I was on the urology service, and it was very evident that the head nurse on that unit was just flat out incompetent. Not only that, but she was a liar. It's one thing to be incompetent, it's quite another thing to be a liar. And so one morning we were making rounds. We'd go around at 6 in the morning. And they had this thing in the hospital. I don't know if they do now or not. It's probably all on a computer, a tablet, or something, a touch screen. But then they actually had a metal, looked like a large metal clipboard, and it had this sort of 14 by 17 piece of paper on it. And it was divided up into columns every 2 hours, and it had all the patients' names. And then you had, temperature, pulse, respiration, blood pressure. TPR-BP. We called it the heat sheet. We'd go in and see if somebody had a temperature. Goes on a surgical, well, any place. I mean, if somebody's running a temperature, something's going on. So we're, not everybody got their vital signs taken every 2 hours. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily go in, every 2 hours and wake somebody up at night unless there was a reason to do that. Probably wouldn't have to wake them up anymore now, given all the noise in hospitals. They'd just be awake anyway. But so you could order them every 4 hours or every 6 hours or whatever, depending on how often you needed to be checked on. Because at least, see, that was in the day when it actually got a warm body in the room to look after a patient who presumably was still a warm body. And more of that anon. So we're making rounds at 6 in the morning. And we go into this man's room, and we look on the heat sheet, and the last notation was 4 o'clock, because we had actually gotten there before the 6 o'clock vital signs were taken. And at 4 o'clock it said this guy's temperature was like 99, and his pulse was like 76 or 80, and I mean the guy was listed as alive and warm at 4 o'clock. That's 2 hours. That's 2 hours between when this was supposedly written down and the time we're in the room looking at this guy. This guy is stone cold dead and starting to turn rigid. I mean, this boy is room temperature and rigid, or starting to get rigid. He's been dead at least 6 hours, and probably more like 8. Which means that not a single nurse has gone in there to cast their eye upon this man in the last 6 hours anyway. Well, so we wandered back to, this is one of the times we sort of breached the sanctity of the charge nurse room where they all congregate to drink coffee and shoot the breeze. And we confronted this individual and said, how's Mr. So-and-so? What did you think of him last night? Oh, it's okay. You know, we're always there. The attending, the senior resident, the junior resident, and me. You know, the first year resident. You know, oh, he's fine. He's okay. No problems. I said, he's dead. He's room temperature. You, you clearly haven't even looked at the man. You're lying. She was out of there within 3 hours, and they wouldn't even let her clean out her locker. They said, we'll pack it up and send it to you. The attending, who had a problem with this woman for a long, long time, and I didn't particularly care for this guy, but you got to sympathize with this guy if he had to deal with this woman all the time, since that was his sort of unit and that was his head nurse. He said when he realized what had happened, he said, before he went in and confronted her, the Lord has delivered her into mine hands. And indeed he had. Now, for the people who like incompetent nurses, there's a happy ending to the story. She went up to one of the other hospitals in town, the major private, well, it's non-profit, but it's essentially a private hospital. We always used to call it the pleasure drone because the residents have to take call that much, and all free lunches, the pleasure drone. So she went up there and she promptly got another head nurse job on a urology unit. Isn't that great? Well, I just thought you guys might be interested in that. So I'm going to just let it go at that. I can talk about my day later, but I'm not going to do it right now. Alrighty now. Bye-bye.